How are you, man? Good to see
I'm
you.
good. How you doing? Good to hear
I'm
from you. Good to
great.
talk to
Great.
you finally.
Yeah, great. It's odd putting a face to the. I haven't seen you, so like I was
Oh,
listening to the
okay.
podcast. So it's
Yeah.
it's it's always strange when you see someone. I think when I see someone or hear someone, I have the same face of every person. Like it's always the same face when I don't see somebody. If you know what I mean.
I've done a few, web things on YouTube and interviews like that. So, but I don't really think about people. I guess I'm not really super aware of the image, so I'm not sort of like, here's my face. So,
Well, you got a cool voice, so
well,
like,
thanks.
yeah,
Thanks.
it's a really cool voice. Is that a vertigo picture in the background?
Let's see.
That
Vertigo.
poster.
Yeah.
Is it?
Vertigo. And I have, this is an unused, production shot from Blade Runner,
Oh wow.
which has only really like little bitty, pictures online, and I use this AI upscaling program to blow it up to 8 by 10, and it looks so
Wow.
good. I was like, oh, I'm going to print that. So it's
That's
one of
class.
Leon's photos that
Ah,
wasn't used in the film, but it looks like a Vermeer or a Rembrandt. I thought that's kind of cool. So
that's class.
yeah, so that's I have to show that off. I'm a film nut, if you can't tell.
Really, yeah?
Yeah.
Like what kind
Sorry.
like
I should
any
I should
is it
talk on microphone so that you can actually hear
no,
me
you're
here.
all good. Is it like any era specifically, or are you just kinda throughout the eras?
I grew up on old movies. My dad and I used to watch, or he showed me like old Sherlock Holmes films from the 30s.
Love that.
And one of the best memories I have of childhood is he still has an 8 millimeter projector, and he would buy these 8 millimeter films of like Laurel and Hardy.
Wow.
And I think he actually had a few sort of shortened feature films. But he every once in a while he would pull that out and he'd project against the screen or sometimes against a big blank wall. My mother would make popcorn and my brother and I just kind of hang out, and it was like the
That's
best way
amazing.
to absorb these films for the first time. And yeah, that kind of got me started. And so now it's just um everything. you know, I love the 70s, I love the 30s. Um Yeah, I was just watching, Forbidden Planet the other night.
Oh, it's a
I hadn't
brilliant
seen it in a
movie.
while. Yeah. So, yeah, just, a wide range of whatever. I'm a photographer by trade, so anything visually
Yeah.
interesting, I'm drawn to. Lately, I've
Yeah.
been weirdly obsessed with you. I don't know if you've heard this Michael Mann film from 1983 called The Keep.
No, I've never heard
It's
of
not a good film, but it's got incredible atmosphere. Like the art department really went like above and beyond.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, so just I could talk for days about movies. So,
Yeah,
but
I'm the same, man. I think that's something that's missing in a lot of new movies that I watch. First off, I hate the grading of new movies, like the color
yes,
grading. I just like I can't stand it. But
yeah,
just the it's just the shots. They just don't look as I don't know. Like I watched The French Connection, and just the way
mm,
that's shot, you're like, or
yeah,
like any 70s movie or like 50s or 60s, like Hitchcock. Just the way,
yeah,
like everything's perfectly shot. Like I mean,
yeah.
every shot kind of means something. Whereas now, I don't know. I hate CGI. I cannot stand CGI.
Oh,
It's I
well, everything. I started noticing this about 10, 15 years ago. Technology has reached the point in filmmaking that you know no matter how bad the script, how bad the acting, how bad the direction,
mm,
it's gonna look like a professional product, and I use the
yeah,
word product intentionally because
yeah,
it's like they're stamped out in a factory,
yeah,
and they all look, polished to perfection, but there's no soul, there's nothing interesting about
yeah.
them.
I totally agree.
Um,
I totally agree.
yeah,
It's like
it's
it's
just
just
it's really all the CGI is really kind of wearying. You know, there's nothing to hang on to, nothing real. And then you look
yeah.
at films from the 80s where it was like the peak of practical effects and
That's it
all
exactly.
that beautiful work, like in, Blade Runner or, Raiders of the Lost Ark or any of those movies.
I was watching someone doing a video on Friday the 13th, I think part 6, and they're saying you should watch in black and white because it's
Huh.
shot so amazingly.
Yeah.
It's the one where your man comes back. They did that for, I don't know if you're familiar with Friday the 13th movies, but
Yeah.
Remember that one where I think it's part five, the new beginning where Jason's not in it, but it's the one after that. Jason lives, I think, where your man goes and fucking sticks the thing in him, and he can. So seemingly, like, this guy did this video on how it's so well shot, like,
Hmm.
and when he put it into black and white, it's like, wow, that actually looks amazing. The kind of like
Hmm.
the did kind of those scenes of like decorated it so it looked more like Universal the 1940s, that kind of, which I love
Yeah.
those movies, man. They
Yeah.
just. I,
I discovered the whole world of fan edits last year, and one of the ones I found was someone had taken the 1982 version of The Thing,
right.
and they call it The Thing from 1951 is
Oh,
their fan
brilliant.
edit. They converted it to Academy ratio and black and white, and they rescored it mostly with period, Dimitri Tiomkin, style music to sort of make it look like the 1951 film, but
Wow.
it's still the 1982 film.
Wow.
And it was really cool. It was just like, oh, this is a new way of seeing this,
I gotta
this
check
movie.
that out.
Yeah, and my girlfriend suggested we watch Raiders of the Lost Ark a couple of months ago in black and white. She's like, "Well, it's in the 30s. Let's watch it in black and white." And I had Steven Soderbergh did this on his website, but he used like um, I think he might have used some music from one of his films just to plaster over the sound so he wouldn't get a copyright strike. But he wanted to do it as an experiment so you could see what it would look like in black and white. And
Mm.
but we just watched it with, the color turned down on the TV with the sound of the music, and it was really it worked perfectly. Like, I knew from watching that film years ago that he had referenced the old noir films of the 40s, and even like there's a lot of expressionist, lighting, which gets we're venturing way into like
Yeah.
movie territory here, but
It's another
the
podcast.
yeah, another podcast. The expressionist lighting of the from Germany, everybody knows this. I don't know why I'm saying it, but goes into the 30s, and then in the 40s it becomes considered noir and all that. But they're drawing heavily on that, and there are a lot of scenes in that film, especially at the beginning where they go into Marion's bar, and I just thought, man, that is right out of those movies. And in black and white, it was just like it was just such a cool effect. It's such a great. If you haven't seen it that way,
I
check
gotta
it out.
check
It's a
that.
lot
I
of
gotta
fun.
check that out, man. That
Yeah.
yeah, I definitely gotta check that out. We because we could probably talk about movies forever, but obviously
Yes.
we're talking
Yeah.
about everyone wants to talk about the Beatles. But when you're doing your podcast, you kind of have a narrative to it. Would you reckon that's from your kind of love of movies and that kind of thing that you have a narrative through it?
I mean, I guess I never thought of it consciously. I
Yeah.
just thought, um, I mean, not to get back to movies, but the thing that the podcast that I used as a model for my podcast
Mm.
is Katrina Longworth's "You Must Remember This," which is about old Hollywood.
Oh, okay.
And because a friend of mine, a few years ago said you should do a podcast. You have all this material, you have this audio, you should. And so I said, well, and I didn't know what a podcast was. This was like 5, 6 years ago.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, I need to learn. And then at the same time, a friend of mine who knew I liked movies said, "Hey, you need to check this podcast out. This is a lot of fun." And I started listening, and I thought, "Oh, this is a good way of like telling a story." Like,
Mm.
so I thought I'll tell a story of each song or concept or whatever I'm doing.
Yeah.
Um, and I also realized after I started doing a few that what I was actually doing was using the Beatles as an excuse to teach music and recording concepts. And I mean, that sounds boring. I mean, if I'm trying to sell the podcast to somebody, I'm not going to go, well, what I'm actually doing is this incredibly nerdy music thing. I want it to be like, no, I'm pulling back the curtain so you can see what's going on and how the machinery works.
Yeah, that's what I love about it. Like, I'm a musician, so I love, all the things with very speed and all that stuff because it's
Yeah.
so you can do it in an instant now. But just the fact that
Yeah.
to think about to do it back then, and they did it in such a creative way. It's amazing. I think I've listened to your podcast each episode about 3 times. Man. I just love listening to them. There's just something
That's
like
funny.
comforting about listening to. I love the Beatles, so
Wow.
anything the Beatles, I like. Me and my friend do this thing where every year we watch the full anthology just
Mm,
7 or 8 hours, however long
yeah,
every year. But there's just something comforting about the Beatles. I don't know what it is, but
yeah,
I think a lot of people think the same. There's something about the Beatles.
yeah. I've heard from a lot of people that they listen to the episodes multiple times,
Yeah,
which, I still find it surprising because when I did it, I thought, 10 people are gonna listen to this, no one's gonna care. I make this in, my little dirty home not dirty, but cluttered home office. Um, and it was like, I'll just do it for fun, and then it sort of got a lot of attention, which is good. And I do plan to make more. Everyone keeps asking. It's just, you know, now I'm at the point where I've done enough, and I feel like I've set a bar for myself, and I think
yeah,
everything has to hit that bar,
yeah.
and I'm probably overthinking it, but, I have several episodes written and in various stages of production and, various ideas that I put together. So, a lot of the moving parts are there. It's just,
How
you know
long does it take on average to do an episode? I'm sure it's different. Would it depend on what era they're
Yeah.
in?
If I have nothing to do and I just focus on, like, from scratch to finish, I could probably do a full episode in 2 weeks, but remember, I'm also doing everything myself. I don't have a staff, so it's just
Yeah.
me. So I write, record, edit. In a lot of cases, I make isolations so that I can, um, talk about these points that I wanna make. And I've been collecting the bootlegs for a long time, so I've been drawing from that too.
Okay. Are you
It's a huge
using La La? There's a thing called La
I
La.
use that one, yeah, and there's MV-SEP is another one.
Yeah, UV5 is brilliant.
Yeah,
It's a free. I'm sure you know it, but like that technology is just getting so much better. It's
yeah.
incredible. Like
Oh, yeah, just in the last year, it's improved
yeah,
dramatically.
it's going leaps and bounds, like
Yeah,
which is crazy to just isolate the stuff. It's funny when you hear stuff isolated the Beatles, like which I like, is they're not all playing. Like modern music's so gridded, and it just gives this. It's like
yeah,
just things that are slightly off and stuff like that, which I love. Like
yeah, yeah. You hear mistakes, you hear,
yeah,
uh and George Martin's attitude was like, "Well, life's too short, no one's gonna hear it."
yeah. Wait till it's like my friend. He recorded Jimi Hendrix, and
Uh,
he sent me all these stems, and you can hear Jimmy during Foxy before he's in the vocals box. He's like going.
yeah, yeah,
And it's
yeah,
on the track, but you just
yeah,
can't hear it because it's so loud. It's so cool. Like it's
yeah,
natural. Whereas now you could just go click, gone.
yeah. Yeah, a
So
lot of well, I worked in a recording studio briefly about 25 years ago when I thought I wanted to be a recording engineer,
mm,
and, mute automation was the big thing then, where you could go in, you could mute tracks, if you weren't singing, you could just turn the sound down, and, but yeah, one of the most fun things is hearing all those little in between bits where, like, Paul's warming up and getting ready to sing a part, but he, like, does this very low level, sort of faint practice just before they start. So it's just to me, it humanizes the whole
yeah,
process.
totally, man. I loved how you got real players to do the clarinet parts for when I'm 64. That's what I love
Mhm.
about that. You're getting like real people to play these things because you're kind of deconstructing it. And
Yeah,
man, I like that because as someone who writes music and loads of people always when people talk about the Beatles, they talk about purely the music side of it, which is the side that obviously is the side of Beatles. But there's also that other factor of the production and Jeff Emerick and George Martin, that is the sum of the parts, I think.
yeah. And I mean, I would like to re-record all the scores with actual musicians, but, it's insanely expensive. And what I've started doing, and I actually have several, ready to go. I've taught myself over the past few years how to, program sample libraries through
Oh,
MIDI,
great. Great.
and so I've recreated some of the scores, that way with, I mean, if you told me 5 years ago that sample libraries could sound like this, I would've gone, "Oh, come on, it's impossible, like, it's gonna sound like bloop, bloop, bleep, bleep," right? But it's in some cases, it's almost indistinguishable from actual players. It's mind-blowing.
What are you using, like
So,
Spitfire and stuff like that?
some Spitfire, I have a good, solo strings library from them. 8 Dio is one
That's a
that,
good company, yeah. They do some
yeah,
great
they
stuff.
lots of great stuff. Um,
Have you
and
got
there's a lot
the
of free things too.
have you got the East West Fab
Yes.
4? That's
Yeah.
brilliant, man.
Yeah. Yeah.
That
I
is
have that.
brilliant.
I subscribe to them, to that, to East West. So I really use a lot of the orchestral stuff from them. And I've just started dipping into um, the Waves audio and the Universal audio, but mostly for those aren't instruments. Those are sort of more production. So I can do, you know, the Waves has the Abbey Road chambers, so I can, if I want to use reverb or
Yeah.
whatever, I can get that sound.
Yeah, yeah,
This
yeah.
is really granular stuff that no one's going to care about, but it's fun to, sort of play with.
Yeah, and they have the tape simulation, the
Yeah,
JJ737 that they use and
yeah,
stuff like that. So there's
yeah,
all that kind of there's a great company, IK Multimedia. They sampled Sunset Sound.
yeah.
It sounds incredible. Like I did put it on a mix and I kind of put the wet up to about 20%. So it
Yeah,
makes everything sound like because if you're recording everything separately,
yeah,
it sounds
yeah.
separately, but then when you put it into a room, it gives that kind of
Right,
cohesiveness to it. So it's
right.
amazing what you can do. I always say, because I've worked with orchestras a lot, I always say that like sample strings sound amazing, and then you put it against a real orchestra, you're like, okay, this
Yeah,
it's like it sounds amazing until you do the same thing on an actual orchestra. You're like, wow,
right, right.
it's the
I
the
agree.
difference is just it's getting there though. It's getting there,
Yeah.
but there
I
is
mean,
still that
nothing is gonna match having real players, and
no,
that's my preference. It's just for my purposes, what I'm doing, it's for demonstration and is to be able to say, I did a mix of Eleanor Rigby, I recreated the score, and then I did a mix of just one violin and one cello, just to kinda hear what that sounds like deconstructed.
yeah.
And the sort of end game for this is to eventually do multimedia presentations live so that
Wow.
I can do like 10 or 12 scores and really just break them down and say, like, let's just hear what the bass clarinet is doing on When I'm 64.
Oh, that's cool.
Or Penny Lane, let's take that, like, let's listen to each section they recorded because they recorded it separately, it on different days. So it's not all a bunch of people in a room at the same time. It's like the flutes at one time, and then you have, the English horn at one time and the trumpets, so it's to be able to just sort of pull all that out and be able to play it for people. Which I couldn't do with live musicians. It would be just, prohibitively expensive, and I couldn't travel, I couldn't go to different venues and do that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It costs a lot in that aspect. Plus,
Yeah.
plus, it sounds good when you do. For what you're doing with it, it sounds great. Like, so it's perfect, exact for what you want to do. And like
Thanks. Yeah.
hiring musicians is just
Yeah.
Fiverr. Have you ever Fiverr is a great place. Have you ever heard of
Really?
this place called Fiverr?
Yeah.
Um, Dude, I've got some amazing violin players off there and
Huh.
trumpet player. Yeah, like I've got like I'll send you afterwards some of the stuff I've done on it. Like a guy from Ukraine did like
Wow.
violin parts for like $40,
Wow.
and it sounds incredible. Like it's like Jesus.
I
Write the score and send it to him.
Yeah. I'd be really interested in that because one of the other things that the Beatles thing is sort of the core of, the scores, but I've also been recreating some cues from films.
Oh wow!
I just did the main title of Alien, and I'm
Oh,
eventually gonna
class,
do
man.
um I've actually done a screen recording. I just need to put the rest of the notes together and the visuals, but I'm gonna do a walkthrough of sort of breaking down that score instrument by instrument. Because when I first started, sort of teaching myself orchestration,
Mm.
that was one of the scores where I thought, "How did he make those sounds? Like, what is that?" And so now I can look at this and I can play, and there are all these articulations, in the different libraries, so, like, I can actually recreate this. But, I was contacted by someone who runs a small label who's been, they've been re-releasing, and releasing film scores and TV scores for years and years and years. And he said, "I'm really impressed with what you're doing. I'd like to talk to you about, maybe at some point commissioning you, or we could release some of the
Brilliant.
stuff you've done." And I don't know that, anything will come of it, but I told him, ideally, if I were going to do that, then I would have the MIDI as sort of the background, but I would want to overdub actual musicians on top of that. just to
Yeah.
give it that extra dimension in life.
Yeah, because it
And if
really
I could do that
works.
with the Beatles scores, I would do that too.
Yeah. So can you play like a lot of instruments, or you just learn?
I tinker, like,
Okay. Okay.
I know how to play guitar, reasonably well. I can find my way around a keyboard, I'm not trained at all.
Okay.
Um, I used to be a much better guitar player. Now it's just sort of like, strum some chords. I've really let that sort of, there's only so much time, and I have, many things that I have to do. So, um, but I could get back the, some ability if I sat and worked at it. And
Okay.
I would love to play piano, at a fairly proficient level. I just,
So
um,
you taught yourself how to orchestrate.
yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say I'm any kind of expert, but yeah, I've watched a lot of tutorials and done a lot of reading, and now I'm, in the last year or so, I've actually started looking at scores.
That's
Um,
great.
so and really recreating these scores has been an incredible education, just to be able to look. And I don't know if you know the film Fahrenheit 451.
That's a brilliant movie and
I
book
did
too.
th I did I
The
recreated
original.
several cues from that, yeah, the Truffaut film.
Okay. Brilliant.
Recreated several cues from that, one of which is, the road and finale, this beautiful that, at the ending. Um, and it I first heard that probably when I was 16 because I saw the film
Yeah.
on television, and then I realized my dad had this album called The Fantasy Film World of Bernard Herrmann, and it was like,
Cool.
"Oh, I can listen to this. I just saw the film, I can listen to this now." And I put that on, and it was one of those things, just like, it bewitched me from that moment, like. And so having this, there's a guy that I correspond with in LA who has a lot of these scores, and he sent me things, and I've recreated them, and it's just like, "Oh, that's how that's done," It's the sort of like I mean, people who are trained in music can probably hear it and go, "Okay, I understand," but I'm sort of figuring this out very late, and
Right, right, right.
being able to see it and then play with it, in MIDI on the computer and program and sort of, understand how all these things are interacting with each other, um, is just fascinating.
Yeah. There is something too cool. There is something also about not knowing, the kind of going, how did they do that? Like, there's something cool
Yeah,
about that, when you kind of
yeah.
know how it's done. It's like, it's interesting, but still there's that mystery is kind of cool too. You're like, oh, how
Yeah.
did they do that, or how they get to, like, the Beatles, the start of the Hard Day's Night, that clang, for
Oh,
years,
yeah,
people were like, what's that? And it's like,
yeah.
till they heard all the
There I
tape.
mean, there I do have this concern sometimes that maybe I'm deconstructing things too much and then I'm gonna ruin the mystery, but, um, I mean, I do it because I'm curious myself, and I think other people will be curious. And
Mm,
so far, people have
mm,
been very positive, like, they're not yelling at me like, "Oh, you're ruining, everything." You're like you're telling all the you're pulling the curtain too far back, and,
yeah.
um
Oh,
but
that's great.
I do wonder about that, though. It's like, do you think I don't know, I mean, when you see scores and to something that you've heard um and you sort of you can see how it's done, like, you can look at Ravel and you can say, "Okay, here's how he orchestrated this." Is it Does it take away from that magic, or is it, like, it's accentuated?
Uh, I think humans have a good way to kind of we can know how it's done, but then we can also just when the music comes on, we can also lose ourselves. You're not going to go, well, that's he's doing the counterpoint
Yeah,
melody to that. You don't like
yeah.
if you were to listen to music like that all the time, it'd be boring.
Right,
If you were to go
right.
and he's changed key there, and he's it's just like
Right.
which you can hear instinctually, but it just I think, like you were saying, I think it can add to it, actually. I think, it does it's like anything. When you get something, something's taken away. It's like that
Yeah,
kind of thing. You get something, but something you lose something, but also you get something. So I think there's that kind of thing to it.
yeah. Yeah, there's
Maybe
this
I'm wrong.
sense of wonder at sort of being ignorant about, art and how it works,
Yeah.
but I think I do think the learning about it and having a deeper understanding and appreciation is the trade-off. I think that's a worthwhile trade-off.
Yeah, because especially when you learn like mixing, for example. Mixing is such a a mad thing. You're like, how did they get that? And you're like, they just dipped 500 hertz, like to get the snares.
Right.
There's these little things, and when you do it, you're like, oh, that's cool. But it's there. I suppose it's just like that thing of anything in life, of just like the wonder of it is cool, but then finding out how to do it is cool too.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Yeah.
you know, um, would you ever do a video on Tomorrow Never Knows? Because
Oh,
that is like the
that
the
episode is written
oh,
and
dude,
ready to record.
dude, you gotta put that out.
I'm going. I'm doing six. I think 6 or 7 episodes covering Revolver next. That's my plan.
Wow, brilliant.
And the reason I've waited so long is I want to have them all ready to go before I release them. And but I've recorded, a good bit of material already
That's class.
from interviewing people and isolations, and so I've got my plan down. And part of that is also going to be looking back into George Martin's own production history before he met the Beatles, and to answer these questions. This was the question I asked myself initially: was how did how did the Beatles do this stuff? And then I go, okay, well, George Martin is the one who knew how to do this stuff. Well, how did he know how to do this stuff?
Yeah.
So uh, that's the question I'm answering with one or I haven't decided if I'm going to do 1 or 2 episodes because it's a big subject.
Hmm.
But there are actually a lot of sort of one-to-one parallels in from his sort of earlier comedy recordings, we call them, and what the Beatles were doing. So I mean that I think I'm most anxious about that because I want to make sure I get that right. To me that's such an important part of the story that no one's really told.
Hmm.
And so I keep agonizing over what do I include, what do I leave out? Am I spending too much time on this?
Do you ever
But
put the podcast out and then you're like, oh shit, I should have put that into it? Is there like you find that new stuff?
yes. And when I did the Live and Let Die episode, where I recreated the orchestration with MIDI.
Yeah,
Um, had a
that sounded
couple of
good.
people.
Sounded good,
Thank
man.
you, thank
Yeah.
you. And I transcribed that myself. It's sort of the first thing I ever transcribed, and I thought, oh God, am I going to screw this up? And I think I got about 98% of it right. I sent it to a horn player I know, and she said, "Oh, this looks good to me." And then I had a couple of people email, so I think this is maybe this note instead of this
Right,
note, and then
right.
that might be the trumpet or that might be the French horn instead of the trumpet. So it's little things like that, but I feel like that I got pretty close.
Yeah.
For a first try. But yeah, I do want to go back and fix those things because I am, detail oriented.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. I'd be the same, man. I'd be like, that fucking,
yeah.
that's the worst thing about releasing music, man. Like, you're never happy. You're like,
No.
you will always hear something. You're like, dude, that snare could have been. And you play it to someone, and they're like, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
'Cause no, you're probably the same.
Yeah.
You're going to be your own worst critic. No one will
Oh
ever
yeah.
be a worse critic than yourself. Like,
No. No, no.
yeah.
I was working on I wanted to go back through the score of yesterday and just see because I hadn't touched it in a month or so,
Mm,
and just see if I could clean things up and if I could improve it any. And I've noticed when I'm working on these recreations, like I call them. I don't know if that's the right word, but um that after about half an hour, once I'm there's a point where it's just nuanced.
mm.
And after about half an hour, 45 minutes, if I keep going, I am just lost. I'm in the woods. Like, uh, and I have to turn it off and go away, and I come back. And when I do, almost invariably, I realize that there was no point making those tweaks, and it sounds fine. And it's only stuff that I'm hearing because I'm listening in 5 dimensions
Yeah.
and like so closely that no one is ever gonna, you know, look that deeply at it.
There's a really good company called Swarm. I don't know, they're a
Oh
sample
yeah,
like not that their stuff doesn't sound exactly like, but just the actual feel of them is
yeah,
amazing. How you can do like really nice legato stuff and stuff like that. I think with sample libraries, if you can kind of take one from there and one from there and one
yeah,
from there, you can get a really good sound with them.
yeah. That's what I've done with yesterday. I had um it's 4 instruments, and I so for each instrument, I have a second like a second, you know, cello and another version of the viola and another second violin, another first violin. So I have 2 of each so I can bounce back and forth and I can pick the sound
Ah, okay.
that I want from each one to get that realism and to get that expression.
Alright, that's
Um,
dude, that's really impressive that you learned how to
it
score to do that.
it's
That's cool, man.
it's insane is the word you're looking for.
I think it's
It's really
great. I think it's great.
well,
You know,
thanks,
it's
thanks.
brilliant, man. Like shows you like you're passionate about it. And like
Yeah,
you're just gonna learn more,
yeah.
which is just amazing. What's it's such a hard question. Man, I'm sure if my flip flop for you, but what's your favorite Beatles album? It changes for me always.
It
Between three,
changes,
between three.
the last couple of years, though, weirdly, it's been Magical
Oh,
Mystery
dude,
Tour, which
I'm the same.
yeah,
I'm the same. Just anything psychedelic, I'm like, yes,
yeah.
I'm game
And
for.
there's also I described it this way on Twitter or something at one point, and I said, you know, it has this autumnal feel to it. I you know, I don't know any other way to describe it. It just feels like, you know, there's the Summer of Love, the Sergeant Pepper, but this is the autumn after that. You know, it's the sort of like the leaves are changing and everything is getting a little cooler and darker earlier and just something and it's to me it's very comforting and a bit dark. You know, there's a
Yes.
darkness in there
Yeah.
that you know, Pepper has that in A Day in the Life, but, you know, nothing is like Walrus, you know, I Am the
Y
Walrus is
yeah.
just
Yeah.
madness.
Yeah, totally.
Uh,
And plus it's the end of their not that they didn't but that kind of experimentation, it's the end
yeah,
of, like, the mad lyrics and just you know what I
yeah,
mean? That's
yeah.
kind of which for me is, like that's why I always I never really liked the White Album until the remixes, which sounds weird.
Mm,
I know that
hmm,
sounds really weird, but I think when I heard the Glass Onion and they had the strings really like what it just was like, whoa, that sounds cool. And then I kind of got.
yeah,
I still think the White Album should be one album. That's just my take. There's too much mad shit like Piggies and stuff like that for me. I'm
yeah,
like, nah, man, don't. But anyways, I always loved the psychedelic Beatles stuff. That's my kind of era.
yeah,
Like that's the stuff I first heard.
yeah,
So it was weird going back. Same with the Beach Boys. I first
yeah.
heard Pet Sounds and I went
Oh,
back
really?
and listened to this. I was like, what's this surf and stuff? You know,
Huh.
so it's kind of like the first thing I consciously heard of the Beatles, like actually really heard was Tomorrow Never Knows. And I was like, is this like
Mm,
a remix? Is this like
hmm,
someone remixed this stuff? Because it sounds
yeah,
so like fresh. It still sounds
yeah,
amazing. And I was like, what the fuck is this? I was like, how to do it? Like just that song still blows my mind. I just think it's such
yeah.
a piece of art, that song, amazingly.
Yeah, that to me is where everything changes. It's just it's the shift from, you know, we're a rock and roll band and you know, we write great songs and we have an understanding of the studio to absolutely blowing everything up and turning it upside down and you know, everything on that record is done
Yeah.
wrong, you know, and it works.
Even like even Tomorrow Never Knows sounds like the drum. It's like a drum loop, like
Yeah,
boom, boom, like that's
yeah,
in the '60s, like 1966. Incredible, man.
yeah,
Just
yeah.
incredible. Would you ever do? I know you're probably so busy with the Beatles. Would you ever do a Beach Boys podcast? Because I love the Beach Boys.
I don't know enough. And I mean, to me, my focus, you know, my interest is in sort of pet sounds
Smile.
and yeah, and Smile, and the production and the I mean, you probably have the Pet Sounds box where they have the isolated vocals. That was just like, you know, revelation, just
Just incredible.
incredible.
Yeah.
I just burned a disc of that and listened to that, you know, endlessly for a long time. Um, and you know, I like some of the earlier songs and you know, sort of the surf stuff, but yeah, just it doesn't my interest doesn't really go beyond any of that.
Well, it's interesting. Have
Yeah.
you heard Sunflower?
Yeah. Oh,
Wow,
yeah. I've heard
man.
a lot of stuff over the years. I had a
Wow.
friend who just gave me a pile of bootlegs one day. He's like, here's, you know, you'll probably like these. And I don't think I ever even finished listening to everything, you know, very in depth. I like put it on and play in the background, but nothing really like
How
concentrated.
dare you, Jason?
I know,
How
I know.
dare
It's heresy. It's heresy. I admit it.
Do you remember the first
I have
time
no
you
defense.
yeah, it's like, nah, man. Do you remember the first time you heard the Beatles? Like consciously heard them like that? You were like, oh wow. Because I'm sure through life we've all heard, you
Yeah,
know, Yellow Submarine when you're a kid, I heard
yeah.
that, but was there any time you kind of like, oh, you were like really aware of it that you consciously heard them?
I'm trying to remember. I think the first something about "I Wanna Hold Your Hand" sticks in my brain, and it's because and I don't know that I actually heard this at the time,
Hmm.
but my parents were never big rock and roll Beatles fans. My dad was a Kingston Trio fan of all things, but
Oh.
he liked "I Wanna Hold Your Hand." He loved that song, and so that was the first kind of, like, awareness somewhere in my brain, and then, we s you know, he used to take me to record stores, and I talked him into buying me the 62 to 66 compilation, the double LP. And so that was kind of my introduction, and then not long after that, I would go to library sales where they would, books and records and stuff, and there was a copy of Sergeant Pepper. And that's how I began building my record collection was,
Right.
at library sales. So I would just go and I found an original pressing of All Things Must Pass for $4. It was like
That's crazy.
crazy. Yeah. I mean, we're talking like, a long time ago because
Mm.
I'm 54. So this is probably like 40 years ago almost. Um, but yeah, so that was my introduction to all of that and just sort of inching my way in. And, in the late 80s, the Beatles were going through this sort of like cultural renaissance again, where we were, whatever was happening, George was putting out Cloud Nine, and there was all this sort of cultural awareness and the 20th anniversary of Sergeant Pepper. And so that became, a big part of my consciousness. And I had friends in high school who were talking about the Beatles and listening to the Beatles. So it all sort of came at that period. That's when the flood really kind of began.
Right, right. That's cool, man. Yeah, this is something about the Beatles, man. I don't know what it is, but there's just something. It's not even just how popular they were. Like a
Yeah.
band that did that amount of growth in the short period of time is insane. Like it'd be
Yeah.
like if the Backstreet Boys came out with some record and then they started doing psychedelic music, which is
Right.
weird. No band that was like a teen band, if you know what I mean. Like they were like,
Yeah.
teen sensation. It'd be like if like I've never seen anyone else do it. Like
Yeah.
Justin Bieber never went and did like an Indian album or like, any of those kind of name them. They never did it. I know you could say it's the time period as well. People were kind of more open to that, but
Yeah. Well, they were really plugged into, to what was happening, and they were feeding it. It was feeding them. It was this sort of like perfect balance. My friend Tim Riley wrote "Tell Me Why." I think it's in the introduction to the back in that book. He says that the Beatles are our first recording artists, and the emphasis is on artists.
mm,
They took recording as an art more than any other popular artist before them, and
yeah,
really just turned that into some, that thing into itself. You know,
yeah, yeah.
and I mean, there's so many ways of approaching their story that I think, any way you pick, you're gonna find an interesting pathway because they're connected to so much. It's gonna lead you interesting places. But musically, that's what I've been obsessed with the past 20 years or so.
Mhm.
And I just find that like continually inspiring, continually fascinating. Um, there is just so much. And then looking into what George Martin did is just the whole other dimension of like, here's this trained musician who I discovered in the course of my research, had perfect pitch, essentially taught himself everything he knew. I have his course card from the Guildhall School of Music,
Oh, cool.
and he spoiler, it doesn't appear that he graduated, but he basically knew all the courses and all the everything so well that he could withdraw from like harmony
Right,
class
right,
because
right.
he knew what to do already. And I should add, to that, you know, 80, 90 years ago, people going to university, it wasn't so strict that you say, okay, well, you have to complete your coursework and then you graduate at this time and you get your diploma and then you can say you're a graduate.
Yeah.
I had talked to another contemporary of George Martin's, and he said, well, at the time you would go, and if you were proficient, you didn't have to continue with what you were doing. You could say you'd attended that school and you were a
Ah.
graduate of that school because you'd done the work. You knew what you were doing. You didn't need to see it through the courses. So,
Ah. That's
where
handy.
this is a tangent, I realize, but to go back to, he's an autodidact. He was so fascinated by music, and it spoke to him, and that was his calling, that he taught himself all of these things. So he was so innately gifted.
Mm,
Um, and so that's this other dimension of this person who, from a technical trained point of view, had these abilities and was able to meet the Beatles where they were and encourage that and help cultivate their talents. And they saw that they could draw things from him. And just, as John and Paul were this great balance, George Martin and the Beatles were this great balance. It's just an incredible relationship
mm.
between those, five people.
Do you think
Um,
the Beatles la not that their legacy is more because of it, but because it ended. You know, when something everything nowadays tends to not end, and it's like
yeah,
ever going, and people think they want it, but they kind of don't really want it. You know, it's just like, oh,
yeah,
I'd love another like sequel to that, and then you see it like that was shit. I wish they never made that. Like Star Wars,
yeah,
case in point,
yeah.
stop
Oh
making Star
God,
Wars. Just
yes,
leave.
please.
Stop. Like,
Yeah,
if you told me 10 years ago or whatever, what you want another Star Wars, like, yeah, and now I'm like, no, but
please.
yeah, stop for the love of God.
Moratorium, like for 10 years or so. Just stop making them.
Yeah. Anyways, my point being that it ended, and
Yeah,
because it ended, it's like it's people kind of like tend to want something more because they can't get it back.
yeah. I mean, I see that. I'm working right now with Ken Womack on a
Oh, he's a
like
cool item on the podcast. He's a
oh
great guy.
yeah, yeah. I saw that. I hadn't had a chance to listen to the interview, but
Yeah.
we wrote a book on All Things Must Pass, a couple of years ago, the making of that, and then how that sort of gave birth to Layla. And now we're working on a book about the Beatles in 1974 and what each of them was up to, and how sort of Apple is, developing and playing into that at that period. And the thing that I guess I'd always been aware of this, but in 73, 74, it sort of reaches this fever pitch. It's like every other article is the Beatles are getting back together. They all met in LA this week. John is Paul is flying over to meet John and do this. And it's like it's crazy, because then you look at what they're actually doing in their day-to-day
Yeah.
lives, and the distance is absurd between this like wish fulfillment and who these human beings actually are,
Mm.
who are just trying to get through their day and their year
Yeah.
and accomplish different things. Um, but it does. I think it speaks to a lot of things. It's that, leave them wanting more. They left at just the right moment. Um, and I mean, as much as John might have wanted Let It Be to really be the final testament, I mean, Abbey Road is like the cherry on top. Like Paul eulogizes them at the end perfectly with it, that the end of the medley and all that. It's just like tied up nicely with a bow. You can't ask for anything better than that.
Yeah, what a great way, like, and I think there's even that thing of people always tend to think EMI Studios was called Abbey Road. It's like, well, it's
Yeah.
called Abbey Road because of, like, their influence is just massive,
Yeah.
you always thought of Abbey Road as like, oh, no, it was Abbey Road. It's like, it was EMI Studios. It was like a
Yeah.
totally different kind of thing. So their
Yeah.
reach is so, like, their covers are iconic. Their music is
Yeah.
iconic. Like, everything they kind of, now maybe you could say because when you get that big, kind of no matter what you do, kind of can you know what I mean? It
Yeah.
can become iconic because you're big. Like if they put a
Right.
like the White Album, if
Yeah.
anyone else put that out, it'd be like, whatever. The Beatles put it, it's kind of iconic because it's the
Yeah.
Beatles. So it's
Yeah,
just
there's so
that
many weird songs on there, and yet it's all sort of still iconic.
I love all those. I know people don't like them, but I love music hall
Yeah.
music. So I love Honey Pie and all that stuff. And
Yeah.
anytime I see like these things of like the worst Beatles songs. It's all like Honey Pie and Martha My Dear. I'm like, they're fucking, I love those songs. I don't
Yeah,
get
they're
what people.
brilliant.
Yeah, thank
Yeah.
you.
And one thing that I sort of brought this up in When I'm 64 is that, there was a lot of sort of covers and I think nostalgia for 20s and 30s music in the 60s. I mean, even the you know the sort of trad jazz boom that happened in the 50s, which had its sort of peak in
Hmm.
just before the Beatles showed up. That's in Britain. Um, that's part of that. That's part of that. It's around. It's still there. Like it had its peak in '62, but it was still sort of floating around. Like those people were still there playing music. Ackerbilk was still,
Yeah.
on the scene. So that's something people forget is like that is also a reflection. That is not just some. I mean, Paul obviously was, a big lover of that stuff, but it wasn't just some left field thing. Like this was all part of the conversation at the time.
Mm, mm. Yeah, yeah. People kind of tend to think that music died. I think it died off in a commercial sense, but there was still
Yeah,
like it was kind of like jazz, is kind of
yeah,
now. It was like it's still there. I don't know what it's like now, but
yeah,
I always love it. The whimsical stuff, like I always
yeah,
like Penny
yeah,
Lane. It's not musical, but there is elements of it in it. There's like
yeah.
I love all that stuff, and yeah, when
I
I'm
mean, your
60,
mother should know when I first heard
that's
that was
brilliant,
just like
so good.
I think that changed my brain chemistry or something. It was just one of those like, wow, like the key and the arrangement and the backing vocals. It's just all like, kind of blew my mind.
Yeah,
I wish he'd written another verse. That's the only thing. It's like,
it is
come
quite
on,
short
Paul, you can
actually.
give us another verse. But it
Yeah.
was like it's a really just moving, um, moving thing.
And it's cool with the video of Magical Mystery where they're going down the
Yeah,
steps. It's really cool.
yeah,
I love
yeah.
that movie. I know people don't like it. I think it's
Yeah.
great.
I mean, the videos are brilliant. The
Yeah,
sort of in between stuff is kinda weird, but
yeah.
whatever.
That scene where he's
1967.
he's feeding that woman.
Oh god.
It's so funny. I just laughed my ass off. I was
There's
like,
some
that's so,
grotty stuff in there, as George would say.
but it's so Lennon like. It's like
Yeah.
it's John Lennon. You can just kind of see it. I seen. I meant to ask you this. How come the Now and Then podcast isn't on Spotify?
Oh, I don't know.
Yeah,
Somebody else said that
yeah,
that one and one of the other ones wasn't up, and
yeah.
I tried deleting it and reloading it. It didn't I don't know, like, something is happening on Spotify, and I'm not sure.
Spotify can be weird with podcasts. I've
Yeah.
uploaded my last one, it still hasn't gone on it. So
Oh,
it can
weird.
be just strange. You can have to
Yeah.
upload it 2 or 3 times. I found it and
Huh.
listened to it on some other there was another podcast thing,
Yeah.
yeah,
I mean, there's Google Play, and I
yeah,
think,
yeah, it was on one of those, Listen Notes or
and
so
iTunes has it, and
yeah, yeah,
there's a
yeah.
website too. So if you're ever, missing anything, one of those, if that's an option, you can go listen.
What is, after all these months gone by, is, how do you feel about Now and Then?
I mean, it's okay. It's as far as listening to it regularly, it's not something that I'm going to go back to. But
Mm.
I appreciate why Paul did it. Um, I think it's hilarious that people are trying to read their own narratives into that,
Oh,
and it's
yeah.
just not supported by the facts. But that's Beatles fans for you.
Yeah, I mean, the video is one of the worst things I've ever seen. I
Oh,
was like I
wow.
was like, I couldn't believe it when I was like, "What is it?" I was like, "Is he trolling at this?" When that picture came up at the
Yeah,
start, I was like, "Oh, no, what is this?" I was
yeah,
like, "Is this the right video?" I
yeah,
couldn't believe it, dude. I
yeah,
couldn't actually couldn't believe it. I was like, "What?" Peter
yeah.
Jackson.
It's kinda mind blowing, and I just took it as like a piss take. The whole thing. It's just
Ha
like,
yeah,
whatever.
yeah,
You know.
had to be a piss take. I
Yeah.
was just like I had the guy, who conducted the orchestra for
Oh, really?
for it on the podcast. He didn't have a clue who it was for,
Hmm.
like, it was just like
Wow.
they just kind of got a thing, and he was like the guy who was supposed to do it actually couldn't do it that day, so he got a
Huh.
call and to do it, and he was like, "Ah, I can do it,"
Oh,
but he
wow.
didn't have a clue it was for the Beatles, like,
Hmm.
they kinda thought it was for, like, Paul McCartney or something like that,
I
so
would love to actually recreate that score because I do think it's a good
it
score.
is a good score. It's a
Yeah.
nice little score, like,
I don't know if
it's
there's anybody's done a transcription or, whatever, but, that's, I think, my favorite part of the recording. And I mean, the fact also that they got such a clear vocal,
Yeah,
from that
yeah,
tape is
yeah.
just, you know,
It's that
that's mind-blowing.
I do wish they kept in the "I don't wanna lose you." I
Yeah,
love that, man.
yeah,
Especially, like, that version that Good Sky did years ago, where it was kind of very, like it was
mhm,
almost something off Magical Mystery Door, the drum
yeah,
ba-dum, ba-dum, and, I
yeah.
think I had that's what I was expecting. I had this kind of like, "It's gonna be mad, it's gonna have, like, mad shit everywhere," but it was just
Yeah.
kinda just a song, and I did not like the drum sound. I
Mm.
hated it was like you could tell Ringo just recorded it in his room. It just I don't know, for the last
It's
Beatles
still
song.
better than the drum sound on Real Love, which,
Yeah.
but, you know,
I could
I like Jeff Lynne, you know, just fine, but it needed to be a performance, you know?
yeah, you can tell everything's just tracked
Yeah.
which is you should never be like that in a Beatles song, it's
No.
like,
No, no.
I still love those songs though. I think they're brilliant
Yeah.
songs. "Freeze a
Oh,
Bird" I
no,
really
Real
love.
Love, I love that song. That's a great, great tune and a great production.
Mm.
I just wish the drum sound was better.
Yeah, it's not great, like, it's just
Yeah.
that's Jeff Lynne for you. I mean,
Yeah.
it is what it is, you know?
There's a fan version out there that, because you know, I've been in these remixer groups for a long time and sort of underground trading groups, and someone did a fan remix, and it doesn't fix the drum problem, but it fixes everything else, and it does this beautiful
Uh-huh.
thing in the bridge where it splits John's vocals into stereo, and it is such a beatly effect. It's like, "Oh,
Ah, s
that's what that should sound like." It's
that's
just
cool.
really, you know, really nicely done.
Ah.
So I hope that, you know, they go back. I'm sure they're working on anthology in, you know,
Y
in some
yeah.
process. I would love for them to, you know, really remix those and then put them out as surround mixes so that I can take the stems, do my own remixes.
I think though the way technology is going so, like, quick now, like, we will have that
Yeah.
tech I it's just crazy,
Yeah.
like my friend, Dale Ims, he does these crazy, like, Beach Boys, AI stuff, so he records all
Mm.
the parts himself and then has his own
Oh, wow.
models for, like he did one called "Return to Pepperland." He took that
Oh,
McCartney song and
okay.
did a
That
b
sounds familiar.
yeah, you might have heard that, and first he
Yeah.
started off, he did it with Beatles stuff, but the models, as you can see over the past few like, year or 2, are just getting so much
Yeah.
like, it's scary, like,
Yeah.
it's sometimes I don't know how to feel about that. I'm like, I think for stuff like that, it's cool because 'cause you're kind
Yeah.
of you're not, like, trying to put it out and you're trying to say it's like you. You're just putting it out and it's kinda like, it's kinda like it's like Marvel Comics What If, that kind of
Yeah.
like, what if the
Yeah.
Beatles did that, you know? How do you feel about AI and all that stuff?
I think the generative stuff I have big problems with,
Mm.
but using it to something like somebody, I think it was taken down, but he put the whole thing up on Vimeo. It was sort of re it was finishing Smile with all the original tapes and filling in stuff, missing stuff with, you know, I think he was doing the same thing. He was like singing the parts and then using the model. He'd modeled it on Brian Wilson's voice and then he filled that in.
Oh,
Uh,
that's Mike Leroy.
okay.
Yeah, I had him
Yeah.
on the podcast. He's a great
Yeah.
guy. Yeah, yeah.
It
That was good.
was that was I really enjoyed that. I
Yeah,
thought that was well done. I
yeah,
think for that kind of thing, it's great, and, you know, you think of situations where you have an unfinished recording and the person can't finish it, it would be a great opportunity to be able to use it, you know, for something like that. Um,
yeah.
you know, I think it's worth looking at as a tool. I'm using the the isolation software or neural net. You know, I don't think of it necessarily as AI. They're neural nets, and it's a different. You
Yeah,
know, I
yeah,
think
yeah.
AI is a misnomer in a lot of ways.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. There's a
But
lot of people who thought that Beatles song was like, "Oh, no, they recreated his voice." It's like, "No,
yeah,
it's
no,
not that." Like, so
yeah,
many people had to say it's
that's
not
real. Yeah,
it's his voice, you know?
yeah, yeah. It's just it's using, you know, very advanced software um, to, you know, to isolate instruments and to sort of, you know, breathe life into things that you know, we wouldn't be able to do this otherwise.
Mm.
Um, but you know, I played with the generative stuff, the image, and it's, you know, it's fun at first, but then it comes to this point where, you know, I wanted something very specific, and I wanted to do something that was not, you know, using my imagination and saying, okay, I want this to be out of my imagination, and it couldn't do it.
Yeah,
because
yeah,
it can only do what it's been shown,
yeah.
and it's very limited. And the stuff that's I saw something today on Twitter where this guy was raving about. We took all of the skeleton fighting footage from Jason and the Argonauts and gave it, keyframes, and it filled in the rest. And isn't that
Oh
incredible? And it was the
no,
most garbage looking shit you could imagine. It was just the people in the thread were just tearing him apart. Like, you should delete this immediately. Are you ill? Like, what is wrong with you, man?
man. Why would you do that?
Yeah,
That's such a perfect, like, even the way it's shot, like that's what makes it
yeah,
so good.
yeah,
Like the stop
yeah.
motion, just
Yeah.
yeah.
I mean,
Sometimes you can go too
I
far.
mean, the side of it's like there's the consumer side of it, but I think there's the developer side of it, of people who just don't get it. Like, they don't understand the pleasure of making something yourself by hand. And Harryhausen was doing all this in his, small studio, filming it, building it, like animating it, everything, like just a one-man operation. Um, completely awe-inspiring.
Totally. Like
And
it's
I mean, I feel like I'm still in some of the AI art groups on Facebook just to kind of keep an eye on what's going on. And I get the sense that none of these people have actually made anything before and taken pleasure in, and I'm not criticizing them because, a lot of people may not have had opportunities to make things. But as someone who compulsively makes things
Mm.
myself, um, I just, it's not satisfying to me. It's so much fun to, even if it's a podcast that I'm mixing on my computer, but if it's something I'm making by hand, it's like at the end of it, I've made this thing,
Yeah,
and I worried
yeah,
over every little detail, but there's some joy in making that thing. It's, in that process. It's not even like some of it's the finished product, but it's also just like, being laser focused on that thing that you're doing.
yeah, yeah.
As
And
you, I mean, as as a musician, the
oh,
pleasure of doing that is like, if I guess if it's just commerce and you're just trying to,
yeah,
create something
yeah. Like
quickly and get it out of the way,
content.
it's like, yeah, content. Like,
I
that's the
hate that
worst
word.
word.
It's so like when they go, "I'm making content." You're like, "What?
Ugh.
Content? What are you talking about?"
I have a friend in marketing, and I texted her a while back, and I said, "Hey, what are you working on this week?" And she's like, "Oh, I gotta produce some new content for the company." I'm like, "Don't use that word." And, like, I gave her a very gentle lecture of like
Yeah,
why this is a bad idea. And by the end of it, she's like, "Oh, I get it." Like,
yeah,
she'd come around. She's like, "Well, I'm not an artist like you." I'm like, "No, that's not the point. This is not about, whether you're an artist or anything. This is about, like, there's value to your work."
yeah, yeah,
And this word is, the corporate, you know, brains, tech bros. This is a way of diminishing everything.
yeah. Like
Um,
they don't care about art. They just care about can they make
yeah,
money from it. It doesn't
yeah.
matter what the art is. It could be someone.
Product.
Yeah, it could be someone farting. It's like they can
Yeah,
make the money. They don't care. Like, and
yeah,
that's I think that's such a problem with the actual state of the music industry. It's
yeah,
like Daniel Ek. Like that guy's just a knob. Like some of the stuff he's come out and said, you're like, dude, like
yeah,
he does not like music. I don't care.
yeah,
He can say
yeah,
he does. There's no way
yeah.
you can like music with the shit that you give artists. It's just like,
No. And aren't they generating AI content,
yeah,
literally
yeah,
content? And
yeah,
it's just to fill,
yeah,
like, space and to create money.
yeah.
You know?
It's like
It's
m- into a void of like nothingness. It's just,
yeah.
anyways. Before I let you go, what are you up to and what are you working on before you go and how can people find you and all
Well, yeah,
this?
go to producingthebeatles.com. I mean, I'm on Twitter a little bit, I'm on Instagram a little bit. I tried not to be on social media too much.
Wise
It's
man.
just it's become kind of a waste at this point. Um, between, like, the bots and the, whatever else.
Yeah.
Um, so the website's a good place. I mean, you can follow on Instagram and Twitter. I do sort of post updates when I'm working on things. The latest thing is the book on the Beatles in '74. I'm finishing writing that this month. Um, and so look for that early next year. There's the
Cool.
All Things Must Pass book, which I'm very proud of. I feel like we really told the story of that album in in the best detail we could, and talked to a lot of people who were there. Um,
I gotta
and,
get that. I gotta.
there's a lot of myth, and we deconstructed a lot of that and found a lot of things that we didn't that I had thought for years. A lot of that stuff turned out to be totally false. A lot of the sort of longstanding myths.
Which would that be now?
All things must pass.
No, but sorry, which
Oh,
kind of
myths.
myths? Yeah, yeah.
Well, that Phil Spector was the one who basically determined the sound of the record and bossed everybody around, and
Okay.
it's much more subtle than that. And George really is people say, oh, it's overproduced. George overproduced it, not Phil Spector.
Right. Okay.
So, and we have George's testimony to that, and other people who were there. Klaus Vormann, told me that. Um, and just lots of little details like who played on what, and who was there, who wasn't there, the circumstances under which it all took place. There's a lot of his backdrop and what was going on in George's life at that time, which to me was a big surprise. Again, I think I know this stuff, and then I start looking into it and researching and interviewing people, and I thought, oh, I don't know this stuff. I
Right,
was
right.
discovering things every conversation I had. Anyway, I got to run. I would continue talking, but somebody's
Cheers,
coming by in
hey,
5 minutes to
cheers,
pick something
brother.
up. So
Hey, thank you so
great
much
to
for
talk to
doing
you.
this, man.
Yeah.
Stay in touch. I'll
All
send you
right.
that stuff and take care,
Yeah.
brother. Thank
Love to
you.
hear it. Thanks.
Bye
See
bye.
you.
Bye bye.
Bye.